Welcome to Ask the Educator, a podcast brought to you by Healthmark Industries. Are you a sterile processing technician or manager? Maybe you work in infection prevention or biomedical engineering. Whether you're a frontline tech, endoscopy tech, OR nurse, or surgical services administrator, you undoubtedly have influence in medical device processing at your facility. In each episode, we speak with experts from the Healthmark Clinical Affairs team, industry leaders, or special guests from the trenches to answer your questions and bring you relevant industry information, equipping you for excellence in medical device processing. My name is Kevin Anderson, and I will be your host. Now let's get started. Welcome back to the podcast. For this episode, I have a special guest joining me. His name is Jim VanPietersom. He has 25 years of experience working in a variety of health support services, including Navy Hospital Corpsman, Field Medical Service Technician, Surgical Technologist, Contract OR Service Provider, Instrument Tracking Implementation Service Provider, Perioperative Business Manager, and Sterile Processing Manager. He also has a Bachelor's of Science degree and a certificate as a Sterile Processing Technician. He is currently the Senior Manager of Sterile Processing at Fairbanks Memorial Hospital in Alaska. Jim was recently honored with the 2020 IAHCSMM Leadership Award. This is quite a resume, Jim. I can't wait to get into the interview because I really think there's going to be a lot of great information for our listeners. So, Jim, welcome officially to the podcast.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate you having me.
All right. So, Jim, we talked prior to this podcast because Sharon Rojo, one of our educators here at Healthmark, he paid you a visit, right, in Alaska. He was so impressed by you and your team that he recommended doing an interview with you for this podcast. The little bit that he shared about his visit with you was enough for me. So my hope is that this interview will provide a little encouragement for the techs and the leaders out there listening that may be going through challenging times in their department. So let's get into this. So Jim, one challenge that's common throughout the industry is the ability to draw in employees and to keep them and develop them. So what have you and your leadership team done at your facility to attract and develop that sterile processing talent?
So one of the first things that we did was work on a career path for our staff. And we created an apprentice program, and that was a partnership between Human Resources and the state of Alaska. The state will pay for the Purdue Online University portion, which marries very well with our our on-the-job training for our techs. From there, we retain just a sterile processing tech position, and that's for someone who's working on becoming certified or someone who was certified and then needs to, for whatever reason, it lapsed. And they need a place to step back into momentarily until they can get that certification back. And then the sterile processing tech certified position. From there, when I first got here, we just had one lead on first shift, but we are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we created the second shift lead, which was probably one of the most important because that's when we're doing the majority of our processing, and then a third shift lead as well. And then the creation of two coordinator positions, an instrument coordinator and then an education coordinator.
Wow, Jim. So that was a lot of stuff. And I think a lot more than what a lot of people are doing out there. There's a lot of challenges for managers in sterile processing. Sometimes they might have ideas and things like that. So I really love when managers are empowered and are given that flexibility to grow their sterile processing departments in unique ways, like developing an apprentice program or adding new positions like instrument coordinator. So clearly you've been fortunate to work for some more senior leaders that understand the value in having a quality sterile processing department. But what are some of those ways that you've helped empower and develop your staff once they're into these various roles?
So we have created the ops meeting, which is a meeting that's held once a week. It includes each one of the leads, both of the coordinators, and then myself. They run that meeting. I am just there to listen in and facilitate when needed the conversation. What each one of the leads do is they have a meeting beforehand with the staff that's on their shift and listen for operational concerns or questions or clarifications. And then they'll bring that information to the ops meeting. We open up by just going around and listening to the concerns, questions, or discussion that's brought forward from each one of those leads, and then discuss through those topics. We have that meeting once a week, listening to staff, and then the leads and the coordinators will take the discussion that was had during that meeting, take it back out to the staff members so that the communication is getting out there. First shift always felt well communicated to. Second shift felt communicated to as well. Third shift was always the challenge. They were tired of the emails. I do try to catch third shift when I get in the morning, but it was just a better way for us to communicate. And then it's giving them, they're the ones who are running the meeting. I am not. And so empowering them to have the conversations and then take the information, receive it, and then take it back.
You know what, Jim, I love what you just said there about having them actually lead this meeting, because I'll tell you what, there are so few leaders out there, I feel, and maybe I'm wrong, hopefully I'm wrong, but I feel like there's few that really help their techs and their supervisors and all these other roles develop and have some meetings and have some empowerment. Because what happens when a Joint Commission surveyor comes in and wants to talk to them? They usually want to scramble and run for the hills, right? But if they're ingrained in the process and the operation every day on that kind of level, they're going to have a much easier time speaking to the process, to what they do, why they do it. And not only that, obviously, Joint Commission is important, but your rapport with your customers in the operating room and all of those places, those procedural areas, is going to increase as well, right? I'm sure you've probably seen that happen over the course of your time, right?
I agree. So when we have Red Team come in, which is our mock joint survey team, again, I'll take a step back and encourage the staff. They're trained to, go and welcome whether. Anytime they see someone in the department who they are not familiar with, they are encouraged to go up and greet that person and find out how they can meet their needs. So I agree.
That's awesome. So we also know one of my favorite topics is quality. Okay. So quality is very important in sterile processing, as we know, as it has a direct impact on patient safety. So just out of curiosity, what are some of the quality initiatives that you've developed to initiate or just continued to develop in your role as manager there?
So for the staff, this will be a real simple one and something some people have talked about before, but how we answer the phone and how we answer the door. We will identify that, you've reached the sterile processing department. This is Jim. And then the next thing we ask is, how can we help? It's been something simple, but it's changed the perception of the departments that we serve and what we're here to do. We're here to help them and get them what they need. So that's one thing, just how we greet people. And then we have made use of the quality event program that's embedded within our tracking program. And we are doing right now, we are focusing on reactive. So something that's already happened, and we're taking that information and we're documenting it, and then we're sharing it directly with the individual that caused that issue, and then blinding the information and then sharing the takeaway with the group as a whole. So if I made a mistake, I get to hear directly, I get to hear about it and see about it and have a conversation about it, because I may have some additional information that would help someone else to understand. After that conversation's had, sharing it with the group what the takeaway is. We're wanting to head into proactive quality monitoring, so randomly selecting sets before they even leave the department to try to catch some of that stuff before it makes its way to the procedural areas. So we're not quite there yet, but that is our next goal after we get reactive monitoring under control.
I think that's great. That's another one of those things that actually, it's funny that you mentioned that proactive monitoring. Stephen Kovac and I just recently did a podcast talking about that as well. But it is definitely one of those things that, again, not everybody ends up doing because they're so busy with the reactive quality and not necessarily managing that reactive quality, because there's a lot of value in doing that. So I don't want to put you too much on the spot here, but around that reactive quality, do you do that in a way where it's like you're monitoring a defect rate for not only the technician, but the department as a whole, and you're kind of trending that over time?
Correct. So both. We're looking at the staff member, so each individual, and then we're sharing with the OR how many errors per month based on the number of items that we processed.
Excellent. That's great, because I can't tell you how often it is I go into a department, and unfortunately, most of the times, more often than not, people don't know either their individual defect rate or the department's defect rate. They just know that, there's quality issues, or maybe they're tracking IUSS. So kudos to you and your team for kind of stepping it up and taking it up another notch in doing that, because I think that's truly valuable. I know, being a former athlete, or I shouldn't say former athlete. That almost sounds like I was a professional. I didn't play professional sports, but as a young man, I played sports, and I loved statistics and understanding how I was doing, because I thought that would make it easier for me to improve. And I think that that's really important in our world in sterile processing as well. If you don't know what you're doing wrong, or how often you're doing it wrong, or whatever, how are you going to improve? So great job on that. Another thing that you mentioned earlier that I definitely want to have you speak a little bit more to, or at least bring some focus on, is that focus on service. This is something that I feel truly gets overlooked in many SPDs, either because the departments are struggling just to get through the day putting out fires, or because it just isn't on their radar. That training that you talked about, like how to answer the phone, how to answer the door, things like that. Those training programs are usually reserved for people who are patient facing, right? So those staff like nurses or nurse aides, or people who are interacting with customers all the time. And one of those things I think that unfortunately gets overlooked is that kind of service training for SPD. So kudos again to you guys on that, because having that level of service for your OR customers or your procedural area customers is huge. I think it does great amounts of building that bridge between these departments, because I remember being an OR nurse, and I would ask for something from sterile processing. I might get hung up on, or they might just kind of make an excuse or say something short and snappy with me and hang up or whatever. So that focus on service really does a lot. I promise you that, as a former end user, that's huge. Also, I wanted to see if there were anything like examples wise, whether it's the service or the reactive quality. Is there any sort of specific example recently that happened where you were actually able to impact any of those areas, whether it was service quality or tray quality or any of that, like something just off the top of your head that came up recently that you guys were able to solve because of your program here?
I don't know if this would be the appropriate time to bring up the instrument pre-treatment process. So
Sure.
quality feedback was definitely part of the instrument pre-treatment program. So that was a program as we were getting prepared for the Joint Commission survey, having not scored well in that area in the previous two surveys. And the scoring had to do with not everyone was doing it exactly the same. So it's not that the program wasn't being done, it just couldn't be consistently talked to by everyone at the same level to give the surveyors confidence that we really had it nailed down. So we had created a collaborative approach this time around, headed up by our CNO, included the quality department, infection prevention, and sterile processing. And then what we did is we all read the most recent literature, both regulatory evidence-based guidelines, and did a literature review of all of that stuff, and updated the program. Ended up creating a 15-minute PowerPoint presentation that we took out on the road to each one of our procedural areas, met with the staff, shared with them what the regulations were, what evidence-based guidelines were saying, and how that would look operationally. And then also from there, a little 5 to 10 minute video of that. So if anyone onboarded after we did those meetings, procedural departments had something to show them of how to do that. So then back to your question, as the quality reporting, we also created a audit that was ran by each procedural department. And so they would self-audit themselves on how well they were doing on that. And they had to do, depending on the size the volume of the procedural department, they did X amount of surveys per month. They had to do 90% of those and then score a 90% on 14 different areas that they were looking at. And we did that for 3 months. Have to score 90% on the number of audits and a 90% overall on the audit. And then from there, they would move into, that was called stage 1. Then they would move to stage 2, where they were doing 10 audits per month, had to score 90% or better. And then from there, they went on to stage 3. Stage 3 is SPD performing a reactive audit on something that's come in from one of those procedural areas, documenting that, sharing it with that procedural area so that they can share it with the staff members who were involved in that instrument pretreatment process.
I love this, Jim, because this is where sterile processing quality begins. It begins at the point of use. And we talk about this in certain webinars and educational content we provide. And even for myself, I have prior experience doing case cart auditing and doing it from the sterile processing decontam area. And I just want to say, again, I feel like I'm raining kudos on you and your team, but it's true. I think that this is pretty amazing that you found ways and support with leadership and other departments to operationalize these audits truly at the point of use rather than waiting for SPD to say, hey, look what's going on down here. This isn't right. Let's do something about it. You guys are having those individual areas audit themselves, quality control monitor for themselves, and reach a certain destination in terms of quality. I mean, this is huge. And I think that this is one of the biggest reasons why I was really looking forward to this interview. I don't even know if this was something that Sharon found while he was there and hanging out with you and your crew, but I think this is a really, really great project. Out of curiosity, how have you seen the quality improvement in terms of this point of use care of instruments at all these different procedural areas?
So there has been definite improvement and greater awareness. We kind of wrapped up the stage 1, stage 2. Once we got into stage 3 with a campaign of just reminding people of the whys, because we focus so much on the operation that I feel that over time we lost sight of why are we actually doing this? We want to decrease, the risk of spreading infection, and we want to prolong the life of our instrumentation. So we wrapped up with a why do we pre-treat our instrument campaign. Just went back out to the directors, gave them a poster, and they shared that with their team coming from the directors of each one of those procedural. So I would just, I would say the team approach and the support from all the way, we have support from our CEO, COO, and CNO directors, and then managers, educators. It's been a good program.
That's awesome, Jim. Yeah. And I think another call out to be made here is your guys' use of that HealthStream program. Okay. So many of us who work in a hospital are very familiar with HealthStream, but one of those things that seems to get overlooked is using HealthStream as a tool to share information and education about things related to sterile processing, i.e. this instrument pre-treatment program, or as others might call it, point of use care of instruments and devices. This is a huge opportunity that people are missing. And again, you guys took advantage of a tool that was already there, and it's something that you can give to people no matter what their background is, right? I mean, nurses, techs, aides, assistants, whatever it is. And part of the reason why this is so important is because surgical technologists in their training, they get trained on how to correctly pre-treat instruments and take care of them at the point of use. But everybody else who doesn't have that training, that formalized training, is relying on the person before them to train them. And that's a lot of us. That's me included. I was a nurse in the operating room. I didn't have surgical technologist formal training. I didn't really understand the importance of it, the why that you spoke to, right? I didn't understand all that. So all of that would have been very useful to see right up front while I'm learning in the beginning in a module from HealthStream. So again, kudos to you guys for identifying that as an opportunity and, really utilizing that. So Jim, is there any last things that you would like to share that you're just particularly proud of? I just wanted to give you the opportunity before we wrap up here to give any shout outs or to call attention to anything else that you think is particularly important while you have the chance.
Sure. Just a shout out to very fortunate to have the support of, again, I've already said it, directors and CEO, COO, CEO, as well as CNO. So could not do it if we did not have the support. And then I could not do it if I didn't have team members as part of the staff. It would be extremely difficult.
That's awesome, Jim. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and being willing to do this interview. I really think it will be a helpful example for other listeners out there. That's all we're trying to do is share these helpful tips, give you a little highlight, give your organization a little highlight, and help other people raise their game in sterile processing. So thank you so much again, Jim, for being on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That wraps up our interview with Jim VanPietersom. Just to recap this episode, Jim, the 2020 IAHCSMM Leadership Award recipient, shared with us several keys to his and his sterile processing department's success. First, we learned about how Jim is able to develop and retain talent in his department. They bring people in with the apprentice program. They provide room to grow by adding a career ladder that includes technicians, certified technicians, instrument coordinator, and education coordinator. They also have a staff-led ops team that handles a lot of the day-to-day operational challenges and planning. Jim also shared how his team works on quality improvement, and one area of focus in their quality program was all about service, how to properly answer the phone or the door, and how to address the customers of their department. But that's not all. They also have an instrument pre-treatment program to drive improvement of point-of-use care. But they work on their own practice as well. I'm talking about their individual scoring system for their techs based on their tray defect rates. There is a lot going on in the SPD at Fairbanks Memorial Hospital in Alaska. It was an absolute pleasure interviewing Jim, and I hope that the listeners out there come away with some more ideas on how to run a high-performing SPD. All opinions expressed on this show are those of the presenters. Before using any medical device, it is important to review the device manufacturer's instructions for use. Instructions for use. Instructions for use.